To cloud. Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is a recap of the June 23rd workshop called the HSP Advantage. My name is Lorraine Johnson, and Kay Lowry and I are going to be talking with you about what it's like to have the trait of being a highly sensitive sensory processor. And don't try and say that 3 times fast because it will not work. This is also known as being a highly sensitive person, or for short, we're called HSPs. Now, Kay and I are not experts. We both have the trait. So we thought we'd like to give you an overview of what it's like to have a highly sensitive sensory processing system based on our experiences with it, some of the research that we've done, some of the work that we've done to accommodate it. And we just wanted to share some of that with you. It's a very rich world that very few know a lot about. As an entrepreneur, this is not only important for you to know about for yourself if you have the trait, but even if you don't have the trait, there may be people in your lives who do. For example, a virtual assistant, or one of your clients, or a joint business partner. And even if not in your businesses, you might know somebody in your personal life. And so knowing some of this information about what it's like to have this trait and how people with the trait function just may make your relationships a little easier to navigate. As I said, my name is Lorraine Johnson. I'm the founder of Lorraine Johnson Life Coaching, and I've been a life coach for a little bit more than 20 years. I specialize in helping people live authentically. I, for the most part, work with very, very successful women whose lives have become defined by the roles they play, somehow the labels that they've taken on, by what they've acquired, what they've accomplished, what they've achieved, all of which is fabulous. It's more about the what, though, than it is about who they are. And that's what we really try and get to. So they can take better care of themselves without compromising those they love or what they feel responsible for, and live authentically happy, fulfilling, and satisfying lives rather than just having the appearance of doing so. Not knowing anything about having this highly sensitive processing trait, which, like I said, it's a trait, it's not a disease, it's not a handicap. Actually, 20% of the population are born with it and 80% are not. Not knowing anything about the trait or that I had it, I chose a career path that almost killed me. Because you see, HSPs fall into either 2 categories. We're either hiders or we're pushers. I chose a career path that was really geared towards people without the trait, the 80%, who are more like warriors and pushers, and they're go-getters, and they're just on. I have the trait, consequently, that just did not work for me. I was really in the wrong career path. After about 16 years as a vice president of a financial institution, my body just said, we're not doing this anymore. If you won't shut it down, we'll shut you down. So I took some time off to figure out exactly what it was I wanted to do, but not knowing anything about the trait, I did something that was very typical of the trait, which was rather than just figuring, okay, let me go get another job someplace else doing something else and, let's just see what'll happen, get out there and try. I stepped back and I said, well, what worked? What didn't work? What did I like? What didn't I like? Who am I? What do I want? What would really satisfy me? And this is very HSP type thinking. We tend to go in and analyze and think things through, whereas the people who don't have the trait just keep on trying different things. And I've had many clients who have climbed many, many times, many different ladders all the way to the top, only to find that they propped them up against the wrong wall because they hadn't done this kind of thinking. Anyway, I took time off. I did that, did some reflecting, figured out a lot of things about myself, and realized that not just for my career, but for my life in general, having that foundation was very, very helpful. And I wanted to share that with other people. And the best venue with which to do that was life coaching. So I went back to school, took a couple of courses, then wound up getting a couple of certificates in life coaching. And I really liked it. Coached my little heart out, enjoyed it, except for I had a problem with all the selling classes. I just couldn't cotton to the selling and the pushing and the imposing myself on people. It made me feel like I was trying to be the stereotype of a used car salesperson. But I just figured, well, that'll kick in later. Well, it didn't. And by the time I had my certificates and I was ready to set up shop, I realized I was an entrepreneur, which means if I didn't sell, I didn't eat. So now what was I going to do? So I went back, took some extra courses that were not coaching related in selling, and that didn't help either. But eventually, I found a workaround that really helped me with this. And I think a lot of HSPs do have this problem. And so that's what I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit later on. But first, what I'd like to do is introduce Kay Lowry, who's going to tell us a little bit more about her experiences with the trait and more about what the trait really is. She'll define it better for us. Okay?
Thank you, Lorraine. And I'm going to just take a second to put my slides up. So just give me a minute and I'm going to get these in slideshow mode and from the beginning. Okay, and there is a quiz just to follow up. There is a quiz so that you too can find out whether you're highly sensitive, and it's up here on the screen. So take a moment, if you haven't already, to find out if you're highly sensitive. So I am Kay Lowry, and I am a registered dietitian nutritionist with 30 years of experience helping people with their health. And I help people create a healthy, sweet life by building a healthy relationship with food. And you know what? I had to do that for myself first, because when I was 8 years old, I started eating. And only it wasn't really eating, it was hiding. It was hiding. And seriously, something bad had happened to me. And when something goes wrong, what we want to do is we want to fix it, right? And so I was trying to fix it with eating, and especially loved my mother's homemade pies, cakes, cookies, and brownies. And my mom made the best chocolate chip cookies in the whole wide world. And interestingly, though, when speaking of hiding, I was hiding as I grew up. That was my thing. And I was still craving sweets, and my weight was fluctuating. And the thing is I was hiding. I didn't want anybody to find out my secret. I didn't want anybody to let anybody in. And so I couldn't form the relationships that I wanted to have. And the most important relationship in the world was with my husband. And we had a horrible relationship because I was so busy hiding. It wasn't just about the food. And finally, we had so many arguments. And finally, one day I just said, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. And the next day I got up and I said, I am not doing this anymore. And that was really such a turning point for me. And I realized I had been kind of living in the darkness, in the shadows, being in hiding all this time. And now it was time to step out into the sunshine and let the light in and be able to walk in the sun for myself. And so I got help. And one of the ways I got help was with a coach. And this coach told me about what it meant to be highly sensitive. And she also talked to me about the choices I was making. And maybe they weren't so aligned with who I really was. I was trying to be, like Lorraine pointed out, part of the 80%, I was trying to be what everybody else was being. But what instead, my coach showed me the way to being able to make the better choices and be able to really cultivate that healthy relationship with who I really was, my true inner self. And that was when I began to be able to align my passion and purpose and love myself again and feel like I was good enough. And that was a revelation for me that hiding was not necessary, that highly sensitive tendency of either hiding or pushing, I didn't have to do either. And so looking ahead, I had a career for 30 years in nutrition and health, a six-figure income with big organizations like NIH, AARP, probably heard of them. But what I was finding was they didn't have anything in place to empower people in their health. And I noticed that people were getting sicker and sicker, and the diabetes rates were skyrocketing, and the obesity rates too. And I just couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't do that anymore. So 8 years ago, I left. I started my own business, Sweet Life Wellness. And why I did that is because I wanted people to live in the sweet spot of their lives. And what that really meant to me was to be able to have a healthy relationship with who you really are and be able to look in the mirror and love who you see. And instead of having to go to the doctor every other week, which we don't want to do we? Right? Or not having the energy to play with kids, grandkids, or having weight we didn't want to have. And I knew there just had to be a better way. And it was really later when I discovered that I was highly sensitive that I understood myself. I loved the fact that I understood myself better, my real self, not just the social self of trying to fit in. And I was able to feel stronger and build my confidence to be able to use the highly sensitive strengths in my business and in my personal life, because I learned about how to do this in my personal life. But what about business life? That's a whole different story. And so knowing that I was highly sensitive helped me put things into perspective. And first it was the hiding that I could put into perspective and see that I've been living in the shadows instead of in my strengths, my highly sensitive strengths. And it also helped me recognize my highly sensitive strengths when I went into business, of seeing things, being a visionary, being creative, being intuitive, and being able to align what was possible and see along my values and passion and purpose. So when I became an entrepreneur, I really opened my heart and I took a bold step, and I felt like this acrobat jumping onto the trapeze, and I felt this sense of freedom and of flying. But then I looked down. I noticed there wasn't a safety net there, guys. There was no safety net. And I was afraid I was going to fail in business because I really had no experience with it. And the coaching programs that I was involved with didn't seem to help. And so it was just really a coincidence, but a wonderful coincidence that 4 years ago, my friend, Stephanie Bonti-Labert, introduced me to Heather Dominick, who is the founder and leader of the Highly Sensitive Entrepreneur Movement and A Course in Business Miracles. And she was highly sensitive, and she had a quiz for us highly sensitive entrepreneurs. And of course, I was uber highly sensitive. And what was really lucky is how she talked about these highly sensitive strengths and how we could do things differently. And we didn't have to do things like the other 80% because it didn't work for us. And like Lorraine said, we could keep trying and trying and trying, but until we looked into our hearts and really assessed what it was that was helpful for us, you know, it wasn't going to work. So really finding out that what makes us highly sensitive can also make us exceptional was such great news. And Heather Dominick based her work on the work of Elaine Aron, who wrote the book, conducted studies on the highly sensitive person. And wonderful to be able to read some of that book and know that she's talking about 20% of the population and who have this ability to be able to think and feel things more deeply. And also we can get overstimulated as a result, and then even shut down more quickly. But you know, she highlighted it as not a weakness. It's not something to eliminate, but really something to take advantage of, which very much excited me. And she also talked about being able to use these strengths in business and as a leader, which I thought was fabulous. One of the interesting things that she brought out was that we have an enriched brain circuitry in the area of action planning, which helps us to kind of, Lorraine was talking about this processing, helps us to process ahead of the action planning. So it really brings us powerful strengths that we can take advantages of. However, we're challenged by overthinking and by emotional overwhelm. So those are things that we need to be able to balance out and really avoid we can push, we can hide, or we can be in our own mode of being in our strengths. And Elaine Aron also talked about the 80% being like warriors, and I think Lorraine mentioned this, being more aggressive, more competitive, out to win. Well, we highly sensitives are more like counselors and advisors. We have a very different approach. It's not an approach that needs to be eliminated because it takes all kinds. The two are complementary. And being HSE can be an advantage. And we want to take a look at, so this is the article that I'm taking some of what I'll be talking about next from. It's an article from Forbes Women magazine about why highly sensitive people make the best leaders, according to Melody Weiling, the psychologist who interviewed, as a matter of fact, she interviewed Elaine Aron. And Elaine talked about how being intuitive was her greatest strength. And that's really just about knowing, just a natural inner knowing, which is a wonderful strength. And also the strength of empathy. And the coolest thing I thought was she had talked about an article by John Hughes, who published his article on LinkedIn and is highly sensitive. And his article is called 3 Reasons Highly Sensitive People Make Better Leaders. And that to me, these 3 things really capture the HS advantage. And the first is subtleties. We're soaking in everything, all the subtleties, the vibes, the emotions that are in a room, in a meeting. And secondly, processing first and then the action, being able to observe, listen, process instead of jumping in and shutting other people down. And that leads to a third thing, which is the resonance, being able to say the right things, take the right actions at the right times because of being able to use understanding and empathy to be a leader. And highly sensitives do this naturally, according to Elaine Aron and John Hughes. So fabulous. But who are these people? 20%? But what do we mean by 20%? Well, here's just a few examples of people you have heard of. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Beyonce, Nicole Kidman, who is a wonderful actress. So there are many, many, many more, but this gives us just a little snapshot that these are not just people living in the shadows that are too shy to come out and play. They are people who have made significant contributions. And all of the rest of the HSPs, we also have that potential. So now a word about self-care. And self-care is really something that's crucially important for highly sensitives. Whether you're highly sensitive or your family member is or your client is, we just need to be attuned to these, how being highly sensitive is affecting the need for self-care. Usually, highly sensitive, we've noticed, or you're hiding like I was for so long, or pushing like Lorraine was, or you can do both. And these tendencies need to be balanced. And so we need different self-care. And we need different self-care because of the tendency to get overwhelmed, overstimulated, and then to hide or push or both. So the remarkable things that I learned from reviewing her book was that they experience stress more than others, HSPs do, and so they need different self-care as a result. And, I've found that for myself as well. And that's been one of my biggest challenges, is trying to have the right amount of self-care as I'm caring for myself and I'm caring for others. Where's that balance that works for me staying charged up and not being depleted, and for being able to give what my clients need. So some of the things that you can keep in mind in terms of self-care for highly sensitives is, first, our work environment needs to be quiet, low stimulation, and rest. HSPs need a lot of rest. And it could be contemplation, could be sleep, could be meditation, could be prayer. But we need time for that. And fun, our fun might look differently than other people. I love to maybe read a book in my spare time. And then there is the effect of caffeine and medications may just be stronger on HSPs. For example, caffeine, it may affect you more than other people, and so it's important to have it early in the day if you drink caffeinated beverages. And then there's that idea of transition time. We need more time for recovery. Alone time, downtime, just time on, time out, time off. And then we're super creative. So we have all kinds of ideas and we want to do all kinds of things and we want to do it all. But that is really hard on us. So we have to be selective, and we have to prioritize. And we do tend to put ourselves last because we're so conscientious. So that's why it really takes tuning into ourselves if we're an HSP, or encouraging others, our clients, to tune into themselves to figure out what their self-care needs are. And so we are going to ask Lorraine now to come back and talk about how we work differently. We've talked a little bit about self-care, our overall qualities, but what about our work life? How can we take that and make it an advantage? I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Lorraine.
Okay. Yes. As entrepreneurs, we tend to do things differently, and we really have to incorporate that into how we work. One of the things that Elaine Aron explains is that we're taking things in almost at 100% in every area. So when we're looking, we're not just looking at you, we're looking at everything in the periphery. When we're listening, we're hearing not only what you say, but what you don't say. Every time you mention your mother-in-law, we'll notice if there's a little twitch in your eyebrow. We notice all the little details. And so we're taking in information from all of our senses at a high rate. And that's why we tend to poop out early. We get overwhelmed and we get tired. So we have to compensate for that by learning how to work differently. Kay just gave some examples about self-care. We also have to do things differently in terms of scheduling. We have to be very careful with our schedules. If you have more energy in the morning, fine, then don't schedule an appointment for 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the evening. One of the things that I really would like to talk about in a moment is, like I said earlier, selling and prospecting. You know, this trait is so interesting, and Elaine also makes a great analogy. She talks about our government. The executive branch would be pretty much more like an 80 percenter. 80 percenters are always looking to expand, to compete, to win, just like Kay said. And we, as 20%, we look inward and just, we have a rich inner life. And what made me do this? Why am I doing this? Am I doing this going to affect somebody else? And how? And that kind of is more the priests, the royal advisor, the judges. And in the analogy I was giving, that would be Congress and the Supreme Court. And the two balance each other out. That is the purpose. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying all of our presidents are 80 percenters. In fact, our last HSP president was Barack Obama. We've had a lot of presidents who do have the trait. And I'm not saying that everybody in the Congress and in the Supreme Court are 20 percenters. I'm talking about the job descriptions, just if that'll give you a better idea of how this trait works. So we often feel like misfits because we are so different. We're often not understood. Our ideas are different. The way we take information in is different. We're just different from the 80%. And many of us, for example, watching this recording have businesses or are in businesses that are not exactly mainstream. They may be very creative, or some might be cutting edge, unique, or even avant-garde. And as HSPs, we love that kind of thing. But when it comes to selling, the warrior sales technique, the 80% technique, the compete and win techniques aren't going to work for us. Like I said, I was very uncomfortable with this. I went back and started taking a lot of sales classes because I was, again, the pusher, determined I was going to learn how to do it. And some of the things I was taught was a technique like agreeing to yes. So you'd start off by saying, isn't it a lovely day? If it's a lovely day. And of course, the person's going to say yes. Isn't it wonderful they found that little girl in Oklahoma who'd been lost in the woods all night and was fine without a scratch? Well, yes. Wouldn't you like to wake up every morning feeling great if that has something to do with the product that you're selling? And you're just yes, yes. You just keep asking questions, getting them to yes. Because what happens is they say, what, this guy's just like me. This lady, she gets me. We're just alike. And then when they go in for the close, you're so used to saying yes, and you really like the person, you don't feel comfortable saying no. And at the very least, as a salesperson, you come out with an agreement to at least have another meeting. That's a typical 80% sales technique. Or I remember learning about neuro-linguistic programming, where we were taught to be able to really hone in and determine whether somebody was visual or auditory or tactile. And if they were visual, you would say things to them like, oh, I see what you're saying. Or you would explain whatever it is your pitch was in very graphic terms. And if they were auditory, you wouldn't say, I see what you're saying. You'd say, oh, I hear you. I hear exactly what you're saying. Or you say, you sound like the kind of person to me who would. And if they're tactile, then you would just kind of get a little more quiet, talk a little more softly, and you would tell everything in terms of stories. And you'd reach in from time to time and touch them gently and say, can I tell you a story? Because you're meeting them where they are. And at that point in time, they, again, feel like, wow, this person's just like me. I'm going to buy whatever it is they're selling. And that's really great. But usually this kind of teaching strikes us as 20 percenters, as the people with the trait, as HSPs, as being very disingenuous and inauthentic, and on some level even phony. Like I said, like being that used car salesperson sort of stereotype, and we're uncomfortable with it. And my theory really is that they did a lot of tests and said that this really works, and I bet it works only on 80 percenters. And the time that it didn't work, or the times that it didn't work probably was when it was being used on those of us with the trait. Like I said, we're very sensitive, and I don't mean we're crybabies. I mean, we just pick up on energy, we pick up on tone, we pick up on everything. And we may not know about neuro-linguistic programming or agreeing to yes or any of these techniques, but we know when we're being manipulated. So this kind of stuff just never feels good to us. And if it feels good to us, doesn't feel good to us, and doesn't work on us, we don't feel it's going to work on everyone else. So what do we do? I'm going to give you just about 4 things that really were game changers for me. And it's not so much about techniques, because we are not that great with techniques unless they really are authentic to us. But I discovered that it really is sort of how we think about what we do. Now, don't get me wrong, I also got the whole, well, don't think of it as selling, you're servicing. That didn't work well with me either. One of the things we have to do is we have to discern reality from assumption. Because we're only 20% of the population, it's common for us to think that we are less than. And while, yes, 20% of the population is less than 80% of the population, 20% is less than 80. But it doesn't mean that the services and the talents and the gifts that we have to offer the world are less valuable. And it doesn't mean that we are less valuable. And sometimes I think, if not consciously, unconsciously, or maybe even subconsciously, we get that sense because there are fewer of us. And what we do seems to be so very different. It may seem like we're less than because we're usually just so very, very sensitive to and aware of what's going on around us and the needs of people around us, and also just society as a whole, that what we do and the services we offer are a little bit ahead of their time. And then you add that to the fact that we're entrepreneurs, consequently, we can kind of make our businesses whatever we want them to do, want them to be, and we do whatever we want to do with them. It's not unusual for us to take and combine 2 things that are unusual. For example, I have a chiropractor who's fairly new to the practice. I've also gone to osteopaths for quite a while because I have a congenital back problem. So most of my adult life, I have been going to both. And this new chiropractor started doing some things that were a little bit different. And finally, I realized he was incorporating osteopathy into chiropractic. And that is just such an unusual thing to do, but it really worked and it was wonderful. And he doesn't have to take this test for me to know that he is definitely an HSP. I was lucky enough to work with Allison Babil, who works with is a member of the HCC. And she did a group Reiki session, and I said, okay, sure, I'll come. And she incorporated intuitive messages into that. Now, some people are very comfortable with Reiki, some people are intuitive messages, but the combination is unusual, and it's really quite wonderful, and it works. She really helped me with the problems with my back quite well. So, but this is to the mainstream, to the 80%ers. We start talking about this stuff, and they kind of look at us like, we're a little woo-woo, like we've just grown a second head right there in front of them. They just they don't quite get it. And they're not quite comfortable with it. Now, 70% of the people with this trait also happen to be empaths. So we're also very aware when they're nodding their head, maybe at a networking meeting, and saying, yes, that's very interesting. And in the back of their mind, let me go find somebody I can talk to who understands me, because I don't know what she's talking about. We can sense that. We can pick that up. And it can make us feel very uncomfortable and a little bit insecure about talking about what we do. So what do we do about that? We have to take responsibility for our gifts, and that's number 2. We have to recognize that this trait of having a highly sensitive processing system is a gift, and it's what enables us to offer what we offer and offer it the way we offer it. Accepting that it is a gift also comes with the responsibility of enlightening and educating the world about the value of the services that we offer. And we have to do this at every single opportunity we get. And we can only do this by speaking about what we do. giving it voice, making it less unusual and strange and, let's face it, to some people, a little off-putting or woo-woo. The good news about this, though, is that it also means that whenever we do what they call prospecting or networking or trying to bring clients on board, whenever we do that and they don't come on board, it doesn't mean that we failed. It means that we planted a seed. We've told people a little bit more about it. We've made it a little more mainstream, bit by bit by bit. Now, with 80%ers, if you don't close a sale, man, you are just a failure and you failed and you go home feeling really bad. But with us, that's not the case. We just have to, we're in the business of educating and enlightening in addition to whatever it is we offer. I like to think of it as a timeline, and that the 80%ers are here, we're here, and we just have to reach back and gently pull them along to where we are. We have to bring them to where we are, into the future a little bit perhaps, because like I said, we're usually a little bit ahead of our time. The other reason we tend to feel a little bit uncomfortable when we're talking about what we're doing and maybe hesitate to talk about it unless we absolutely have to, resist going to networking meetings and that kind of thing, is that we aren't always necessarily explaining it as well as perhaps we should, because it's different. We really have to get that elevator speech down. The other thing that's important is knowing what we're going to say to different audiences, different people. For example, pizza delivery guy. He's been smelling pizzas all day long. He comes to your house and delivers your pizza, and you open the door and perhaps you work with aromatherapy, and he gets all these wonderful essence oils aromas, and he says, wow, what do you do? Are you going to give him your elevator speech, or maybe say something really, really interesting in one or two sentences that he'll remember? Because you have to realize we're in the business of educating people. He may never become a client, but first of all, you don't know who he knows. And second of all, you've just enlightened him a little bit to what aromatherapy is. Or if you open your front door and there's a throng of press out front because something has happened in your neighborhood and they're looking for, sort of man on the street, what do you think about this? At the end of most of these interviews, and I've experienced this before, at the end of most of these interviews, they do say, what is your name and what do you do? Now, you never know. Maybe his producer was asked by another producer of the morning show, keep an eye out for entrepreneurs that are doing something particularly different because we want to do a segment on that. You just never know. So just make sure that you have exactly what you're going to say. And it's pretty much the same thing, but it's just slightly different. Know exactly what you're going to say to different audiences. And you can get really to the root of that by knowing and being very clear about your why you're doing what you do. I like to have my why written on bathroom mirrors and index cards on my car, because that's what gets me up in the morning. It's with people with this trait, it's our why. That's what motivates us. So it's important that we're really, really clear about that. The other thing too is Simon Sinek teaches that people buy because of why, not because of what. So I strongly recommend taking a look at the TED Talk that he does. It's Simon Sinek, Start with Why. And he gives the science behind it. And it's really fascinating, not just for entrepreneurs and not just for HSPs. But if you have a product and you have a business, you need in all of your marketing to address your why, because that's the reason people buy. They buy your why, not your what. The last thing is that it's really important that when we do talk to others about what we're doing, that we speak the value of what we offer, even when it's pretty clear that it's not being understood. And that's kind of hard to do. Even when we've made what we want to say as perfect and clear as possible, sometimes people just aren't ready to hear it. But on some level, they are taking it in. 20 years ago, when I started as a life coach, nobody knew what coaching was. life coaching. They kept saying, well, what game, what school, what sport? And I just had to keep explaining what life coaching was over and over and over again. All of us did, but now life coaching is a little bit more mainstream. Most of the time, if I say I'm a life coach, people say, oh, okay, that's really nice. And I can tell they know what I'm talking about, and they may ask some questions that indicate to me that they do know what I'm talking about. But that's taken quite a long time to do. And I'm not saying I did that all by myself. I'm saying all of us 20 years ago who were doing life coaching had to really just beat the drums about what it was that we were doing and what life coaching was. And you may have to do the same exact thing because people may just not be ready for Reiki with intuitive messages. Heather Dominick, who Kay mentioned earlier, and is the creator of the businessmiracles.com and founder and leader of the highly sensitive entrepreneur movement, teaches that we can't be attached to the approval that comes with being understood. We cannot be attached to the approval that comes with that. Detaching from the reaction of others affords us the opportunity to take responsibility for what we are bringing to them and to the world without taking responsibility to their reactions and not taking their reactions personally. In other words, it's really important that we stay in the name of our service, not in the name of our egos. So if we can get those egos out of the way, say what we have to say, whether it's understood or not, and just keep on going. Give voice to our service and therefore making it more and more mainstream. The only other thing I'd like to add is that, it's really important that we get to know what this trait is about, to read about it, to learn a little bit more about it. There's an excellent YouTube video by a woman by the name of Elaine, A-L-A-N-E Freund, F-R-E-U-N-D. And I think I'm sure it's on the resources guide that we've provided for you. She has an excellent YouTube video called Understanding the Highly Sensitive Person. It's about a 30-minute video. I've seen a lot of them out there on YouTube, and this has to be one of the best that I've seen. I'm not saying I've seen them all, but this one is really, really excellent. The other thing that really helps is to spend time with other people who have the trait, like people in the Holistic Chamber of Commerce. Usually if you hear the word holistic, you're going to have quite a few HSPs in that crowd. Also, there's an HSP meetup organization that is prevalent all over the country. So you may want to take a look at some of those. I am a leader of one here in the DC area, and I have attended quite a few and sort of substituted for leaders in some of the others. And there's always something interesting. There's always a topic that we're talking about that's interesting that is sort of related to HSPs. I'm not saying just to spend all your time with people who are just like you. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying that it kind of is like the wind beneath your wings when you do go out and have to deal with the 80%ers, especially when you're talking about what you do and it's kind of hard and they're looking at you like, what? Knowing that you sort of have that tribe really, really helps, and it gives you some confidence. The bottom line is that our ideas are often way ahead of their times and often way ahead of the times of others and the times that we live in, because we take information in differently, we process it differently, and then we do some very interesting and unusual things with it. Doesn't mean that what we do and the way we do is better than or less than. It's just different, and that's fine. We can be equally successful in business, sometimes even more successful because of the trait, as our non-HSP counterparts. But it's really important that we do things in a way that works for us and caters to our needs as highly sensitive people. We can't all be warriors, or our civilization would have been wiped out long ago. And if we were all HSPs, we wouldn't be around either. Believe it or not, this trait is very prevalent also in the animal kingdom. And that means 80% of the animals out there in the world do not have the trait and 20% do. In fact, Elaine Freund did a little bit on her video about a test that they did with animals. They were fish. I think they were called the sunfish or the sun kingfish or something like that. But they took hundreds of these fish and they released them into a pond and they swam around and had a great old time. They loved the pond. They kind of herded them back out of the pond and then strategically placed traps all over the pond, let the fish back in. 80% of those fish went right into the pond again, swimming around, having a great time. But 20% sort of stayed at the entrance at that little gate. And they were looking around and kind of swimming very slowly, very aware that something was different. It smelled different, or maybe it looked different, or it just sounded different, or it felt different. But they were very hesitant to move around like they had before. That 20% were the 20% with the trait. They knew something had changed. It may have been wonderful, it may have been terrible, didn't matter. They just needed to figure out what it was. So what does that say? That says that if all of us were like 80%ers, like I said, we'd have been wiped out, stuck in those traps, like the kingfish were about to be. And if we were all like the 20%er, we would all be sitting back at the gate, looking around, wondering whether or not we should move forward. So this is nature's way of really just sort of balancing us out. So like I said, it's a wonderful trait to have. It's a wonderful thing not to have the trait. We just balance each other out. Now, I think Kay has something that she wants to share with us. Kay? I can't hear you.
I just unmuted myself. Sorry for that pause. Forgot that I had done that. So what I wanted to say, just kind of piggybacking off of what Lorraine said is, you know, part of this is about feeling good enough and, you know, being different and still being able to feel good enough as a person, feeling good enough as an entrepreneur is a big piece of what I've learned from Heather Dominick. And I have that sense too of the people that I work with, that they're probably highly sensitive. And a lot of them just don't feel that they are good enough, which is, you know, common in many of us. So we've already talked about the trait of the self-care. So again, if I can get this rolling along, we are going to not use this right now, but I just wanted to say that, you know, the people that I work with, and Berea is one of them, they usually have some kind of nutrition related health condition, and they want to lose weight. Oftentimes, and this was true of Berea, they eat when they're under a lot of stress and they just want something to snack on. You know, some call it emotional eating, stress eating. But usually those kinds of eatings that we don't make the best choice, not the healthiest choice. And food is a great thing and we love it. And there's a healthy way to do it. And we want to be in a healthy relationship with food, which is what I do help people with. And, you know, the thing is, for me and my clients, and what happened to my mom too, who she was hiding behind food as well. The people that I work with, you know, all of this made me realize that we need to focus both on what we eat and why we eat. Some people say, just tell people what to eat and they'll make changes. But no, there's something often underlying about why they're doing what they're doing. And so I really want to give you a gift to kind of help with this, to help with making better choices, having a healthy relationship with food and yourself, and balancing that self-care with caring for others. And it's part of what I teach, and that's the making better choices part. And I call it the Choice Point Activator. And what I'm going to do is give you access to me during a 20-minute call where you can bring up a challenge you're having, probably a challenge between your own self-care and maybe that of a client. and to be able to navigate that, to be able to make a better choice and make change happen in your life immediately. So I'm going to just suggest that what you do, if you'd like to have access to this, just pull out your cell phone right now and text me, Kay, at 240-687-1251. And I'm going to ask you to put in CPA for Choice Point Activator, your first name and your email address. And then we will set up your CPA session. And I invite you to do this just as a colleague. We, with a holistic practitioners, we want to get to know each other. We want to get to know each other's work. So why not just taste a little bit of that work through trying out the Choice Point Activator gift. Again, text me at 240-687-1251. And just kind of finishing up, I wanted to say that I saw my mom bake thousands of cookies. She was a baker, and hundreds of pies and everything else. And as I mentioned, I found out that my mom was hiding behind food too. In fact, sometimes she ate pie for breakfast. Now I will say, I have never done that. But the one thing that my mom never did do is tell me that she loved me, not ever. And that was something that I really would have loved to have, and what a young girl needs to hear from her. And part of what would have enabled me to feel safe and to feel less likely to perhaps to hide behind the food. So what I needed was love from her. And so when I got the help, one of the things that I touched on was not just what I was eating. Of course, there were ding dongs, donuts, you know what, Twinkies at one point. But it's not just about the what, it's about the why. So, and the one thing when I did get help that I needed was to get in touch with that why. And so one thing, even though I'll never understand why my mom made the choices she made, I do know this, that as long as I'm still here on this planet and I still have a breath and I still can speak and help people, I will help them make healthier choices and lose the weight that they want to lose and live that sweet life that we are all gifted to live. And so I want to thank you for this opportunity to talk about HSPs tonight and the self-care and a little bit about how we can make better choices and feel like we're good enough. And now, Lorraine, I'm going to stop sharing, and Lorraine is going to close us out, and appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Thanks so much, Kay. It's so interesting what you shared about why you're doing what you're doing, because that's exactly what Simon Sinek says. Start with why. I think it applies in a lot of areas of our lives. I want to thank everyone for participating. It was really our pleasure to do this. I hope you learned a little something new from it. We'd like to leave you with the following takeaways from this evening's workshop. And I think Kay's going to put something up.
Yes, I am. Hang on just a second. Let me forward this, and it sometimes gets stuck on the last slide and I have to nudge it along. So there we go.
Okay, well, just a few reminders. We can function as entrepreneurs with a highly sensitive processing trait just as successfully, if not even more so, as our non-HSP counterparts. Sometimes we function a lot better than they do, but we just have to remember we have to figure out ways to do it differently. Also, having a highly sensitive processing system is a trait, not a disease or a handicap any more than not having it is. It's just a trait. Some are born with it and some are not. And because those with a highly sensitive processing trait are only 20% of the population, it doesn't mean that what we offer in our businesses or who we are ourselves are less important than what the other 80% offer or who they are. We're just fewer. There are just fewer of us. Entrepreneurs who have the highly sensitive processing trait often have businesses that are way, way ahead of the times. So if you feel a little bit different and you're the only one doing what you're doing, not to fear, not to worry. That's very typical. And when prospecting for business, it's really important that we stand rooted in our service by enlightening and educating people about what it is that we do instead of becoming attached to the outcome or attached to their understanding. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And we are delighted to have been with you and to be able to offer this recap video. So we'll say goodbye until we meet again. Take care. Bye-bye.